At MedStory, we take privacy seriously and follow all healthcare privacy laws. Some details may have changed to protect confidentiality. The views expressed are solely of the individual speaking and do not represent the views of their employer.
We activated a walking blood bank, which takes a ton of preparation to be able to do something like that. And we drew blood from the people that had volunteered to be a part of that. And we gave those units of blood to the people that were injured by that explosive device. And we could say everyone that came in that day lived. And that was a really impactful experience for me.
Welcome back to the MedStory podcast, a show where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm Spencer Locke, and on the show today, how Dr. Andrea Austin used the lessons of war to build a new kind of program, one that's designed to protect doctors as much as it does to train them. This is a story about a girl that grew up in a small Iowa town. On her way to school, she hears a voice on the radio. A plane has crashed into World Trade Center. And in that moment, her world changed forever. It's a story about a young woman who chose medicine and the military because she believed that service is the best way to give back. A story about proving herself in a system that didn't always believe in her, and finding mentors that showed her the power of inclusivity. And it's a story about war, about standing inside a shock trauma platoon in Iraq. It's about activating a walking blood bank and watching every single patient survive that day. But before all that, the deployments, the battlefield, the breakthrough, Andrea's story begins in something much smaller. A moment of curiosity. A young girl following a PA around her tiny hometown hospital, realizing that medicine wasn't just science, it was connection. And that, my friends, that is where the story really begins. What was the moment in your career where you knew that you actually wanted to become a doctor?
The first moment was when I got to shadow a physician associate, a PA, in my hometown. So I grew up in a really small town of approximately 3,000 people, 3 stoplights, and all the medicine was done by family medicine physicians and physician associates. And I just got really interested I liked Lori. She was my physician associate. I thought she was a fun person, cool, and I liked science. So I asked her if I could shadow her. And so instead of going with my mom, I asked if I could go with Lori. And so I followed her around and I thought, wow, this is cool. You just talk to people and you're like a detective trying to solve their problems. And so I grew up in Iowa, went to undergrad at University of Northern Iowa, had a good idea that I was going to go to medical school, and got accepted the last year of undergrad to University of Iowa, Carver College of Medicine. Went there on a military scholarship, something called the Health Profession Scholarship Program. So they paid for all of my medical school. And then I went out to San Diego to do residency at a military hospital. And I was in the military until 2020. And then I've spent my career in Southern California up until now, where I'll be starting my own residency program in Pensacola, Florida at Sacred Heart Hospital.
Was there any interaction that sticks out to you that you were like, oh, wow, that is really cool?
I was only in 6th grade, so I don't remember like any one case that I saw that day, but it was a primary care clinic. So you can imagine they were like very simple things, like people with respiratory infections or urinary tract infections or high blood pressure. Looking back, all those things now are very basic and maybe even boring or mundane. But what really stood out to me was the people. And these were all things that were weighing on them, that was challenging, and that Lori was able to deduce and figure out a way to solve their problem, or at least get a little bit closer. And that's what really excited me.
So it seems like you had a pretty good idea that you wanted to become a doctor. I mean, 6th grade, that's really young to be like, this is a career I want to pursue. Now, you get in, you do your undergrad, but you mentioned that you then went to medical school on a military scholarship, which I'm assuming means that you are then going to owe some service after the fact.
Yes.
What made you want to even consider that route of going into the military?
Yeah, so I was 16 when 9/11 happened. I was on my way to school and I heard on the radio. Yes, there was radio back then before Spotify and iTunes. And I heard the news that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And the first time we heard that, we thought it was an accident, perhaps. And then while I was at school later that morning, the second plane hit. And I remember that whole day, school really just stopped. We just watched the television that day. And that left a really profound impact on me. And I knew that our country, the trajectory had completely changed. And so my interest in medicine was already there. And then that really combined with this focus on service. And I always felt to be an American, you should give back in some way, whether that's military service, AmeriCorps, some type of service is really important. And for me, it just so happened that with medicine, I thought, well, the military would be a great place to use that skill. And if you can practice medicine in a military environment, you should be able to practice it anywhere.
Why do you think that idea of giving back to the country was instilled in you?
I think it was my parents. My dad was a deputy sheriff, and my mom was a social worker and worked with people with developmental disabilities. So I actually grew up in something called the fourplex, which looking back was really a group home. My family lived in one apartment, and the other apartments, people with mental and physical disabilities. And so even as a small child, people were knocking on the door, asking for our assistance. And pretty soon I'm helping them with various tasks that they needed help with, or even figuring out how to read something because some of them struggled with reading. And so I think it was those early days of seeing that not everyone gets every advantage. And I started to get that reward of it felt good to help people.
Okay, so this makes sense. That's really unique. Not many kids have that kind of upbringing. And I imagine that had a profound effect on your life. Now, let's go back to that moment of September 11th, 2001. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a huge moment, but what was going on? What was your thought process? What were you feeling at this time?
I mean, at the time, I think we were all so scared. I mean, it was so frightening. And we had gone through a relative peacetime, right? Most of us hadn't really been alive during a conflict. So it was really scary. And I knew that going to medical school, I mean, honestly, while I was thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go to medical school and maybe someday I'll serve in the military, I had enough of an understanding of how long medical school was that I wasn't really thinking that I would someday be in Afghanistan or Iraq. But I did feel like this is something scary. And as Americans, we can come together and help each other out and each use our own skills to contribute to doing what we can in these difficult situations.
It seems like an incredibly wise thought process for someone that's 16 years old, where we have a lot of insecurity in our life. When we feel fear, our natural reaction is to hide, but it doesn't seem like that was the case for you. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I have been told I'm an old soul. I remember being at Girl Scout camp when I was, I don't know, probably first or second grade and being very comfortable hanging out with the camp counselors around the campfire, and they would say, you're a 30-year-old trapped in a 6-year-old's body. I think we're all wired a little bit differently. I also think I was kind of an only child. I had a half brother and half sister that would stay with us sometimes, but they were quite a bit older than me. They were 6 years and 12 years older. So my mom really treated me more an adult. She would have adult conversations with me. She wouldn't talk down to me at all. She would treat me like an adult. The TV that we watched at home, she would watch documentaries and things on the news and current events and want me to pay attention to those things. I think that just kind of pushed me to maybe grow up a little bit faster. And I went to work with her where she worked. So that also probably pushed me to grow up a lot faster. And then my dad was a deputy sheriff, and he would tell stories about his work. And some of these stories were scary. And so maybe that was good. Maybe it wasn't, to be telling a 7 or 8 year old kid about various things that would happen when you were a deputy sheriff. but it definitely impacted me. So I would say, yes, I was not your average kid.
I think that oftentimes in today's world, parents want to protect their children from those scary things. However, the more you protect them from that, you're actually robbing them of the opportunity to learn about maybe the dark side of certain things and then to take action to hopefully correct it. And I'm sure hearing those stories was just the foundation of allowing you to build it out. So when you then decided to, okay, I'm going to go to med school, I'm going to go on this military path, you went through it, you finished medical school, then what happened?
Yeah, so I did residency at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. And I'm old enough, or the Navy was old-fashioned enough, that there still was not an emergency medicine internship. So I actually did something called a transitional internship. And most people at the time would then go out and serve as a flight surgeon or working with the Marines. And there's actually a break in training. But for me, a spot opened up to go straight through. So I did go the more traditional pathway for people out of the military. But for in the military, it was a unique situation because I went from my transitional internship directly into emergency medicine residency. And I was the only one in my class that did that. So I didn't know as much about the military because I was new, but I was really focused on learning how to be an emergency doctor and did that training in San Diego and had a great time, became a chief resident. Fell in love with emergency medicine. And then I would have been graduating residency in 2015 because I left for deployment in 2016.
Okay. So take me back to, because you said in your residency, you fell in love with emergency medicine. What experience did you have that made you fall in love with it?
I had an inkling that I was probably going to do emergency medicine many years before. I had been a tech in an emergency department in undergrad. And one case that stands out, and this is kind of a little bit crazy, it was this gentleman that came in with chest pain and they gave him some nitroglycerin, which is a very common medication for somebody that might be having a heart attack. And shortly after giving him the nitroglycerin, he almost died. He coded very briefly. His heart stopped. He was asystole for a few seconds. We got him back, and we then found out that he was taking a medication for erectile dysfunction, and the combination of that medication with the nitroglycerin resulted in a brief cardiac pause. And that case really freaked me. I was like, whoa, this is really complicated stuff, and things can change so quickly. And so that kind of got me thinking, like, I like this environment. I like that you have to be on your toes and that you have to think both pretty broadly, but also fast. And I felt, I wanted to try to do that.
That's amazing. That's really cool. I can imagine that the dual action of both those medications, which I'm guessing both cause a lot of vasodilation, ended up having a challenging effect there. So being a female in the military, being a female doctor in the military, were there any moments where you felt adversity or any moments that stick out in your mind where you're like, wow, this is not right?
Only about 1,000. I think most of the moments that I experienced were what would fall into the microaggression category. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was subtle things. I think the first thing that happened that was like more blatant is there was a opportunity to be involved in an EM organization, an emergency medicine organization. It was the military component of that. And I told one of the more senior residents, hey, I want to get involved. I want to do this. And they just never followed up. And I kept saying, I want to do this. I want to be involved. And it became very clear that it was like, they're there. Andrea hasn't really done any military things. Andrea is not really tough enough to do this. So we're not going to include her. And then I started to notice that there were only men getting those opportunities in that particular organization. And it was the first time that I was like, wait a minute. Now, thankfully, there was a colleague pulled me into another organization, and I got a ton of leadership organization experience. And I just want to be clear for the listeners, I'm the past president of the Government Services chapter of the American College of Emergency Physicians. And I've had phenomenal mentorship, guidance with that organization. So it was not GSASEP. I won't name the organization that it was or the people involved, but that was the first time that I was like, whoa, I may not get to do everything that I want to do. And it seems like gender's the underlying thread here.
So you were dismissed over and over. Now, you said that there was a mentor. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me who that was and the impact that played on your life?
Yeah. So that was Dr. Tori McGowan. She's been on my podcast. She's also a past president of Government Services chapter of ASEP. Tori is an amazing woman, amazing veteran from the Air Force, and just always bent over backwards to make sure that I knew what opportunities. I think that's a big thing for people. We need to make sure people know what opportunities are out there. And instead of just sharing it with your narrow network or assuming that somebody wouldn't want that, let people know what's available. So then that's inclusivity. We're having this big conversation right now about DEI. Is DEI not a thing anymore? Inclusivity is really important for people's well-being. And it's not that hard to be inclusive. Essentially, don't do all the mean things people make high school movies about.
What's one example of something where she may have opened your eyes to an opportunity that you were able to take advantage of?
I think it was getting involved with GSASEP. I can't even remember what the first committee was that I became a part of. But from there, I mean, really not that long, I was able to run for president. And the opportunities that having that leadership role, it was pivotal. Everything that I've done leadership-wise since then, I can trace back to having experience as a past president.
Can you explain to me briefly, for people that don't know what this organization is and what their purpose is?
Yeah, so the American College of Emergency Physicians is our college. It sets the standards for what it means to be an emergency medicine physician, ensures there's practice, policy guidelines that provide safe patient care. Within the college, there's various state chapters, for instance, like California or Florida. Government Services is the chapter that people in the military or that work for the VA or another federal entity can join, because a lot of times if you're in the military, you move around. So joining a state chapter, for a lot of people, it doesn't feel quite right because, they're going to move in a couple of years. So Government Services provides that home base for people in the federal workforce.
Okay. So I want to get back to this timeline here. So now we are out of residency and then your first deployment. Where was that to? And tell me about that experience.
Yeah. So my first and only deployment was to Iraq in 2016. And then I had some time in Kuwait in 2017. So that was a 7-month period. I deployed with the Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force with the Marines. And we were part of a shock trauma platoon. So we provided trauma services focused on stabilization of patients that were mainly Iraqis that were injured by ISIS. And still to this day, the country of Iraq has really had their medical infrastructure completely devastated. And so when ISIS was planting improvised explosive devices or terrorizing people with firearms, those patients that were severely injured without U.S. and NATO forces would have really had no hope. So we took care of patients that were severely injured, either by bombs or gunshot wounds. We provided stabilization, and I was also there with surgeons. And so they would go to the operating room and get surgery, and then we would determine what to do next. In some cases, as crazy as it sounds, there were a couple of patients that their gunshot wounds were really superficial. Sometimes they were able to be discharged later that day or the next day. And then some patients, we did have to try to arrange for them to be transferred back into the Iraqi system, but hopefully gave them a fighting chance.
Was there any specific day or any story that really sticks out to you from that experience?
Yeah, I think a day that we took care of multiple patients injured by an improvised explosive device. I believe we got 6 patients from that event. And it was the first time that I was involved in activating what's called a walking blood bank. So things people don't think about, to be able to give a blood transfusion to people in the United States, we have this really robust system to give blood. And most of the time, these types of patients would be at a major trauma center that knows how to do all of this and has the infrastructure. Well, there, in order for us to give blood that had platelets in it, the only way to do that was with whole blood. We couldn't store platelets. And so we activated a walking blood bank, which takes a ton of preparation to be able to do something like that. And we drew blood from the people that had volunteered to be a part of that. And we gave those units of blood to the people that were injured by that explosive device. And we saw everyone that came in that day lived. And that was a really impactful experience for me.
What was going on in your head when you decided or made the decision of, wow, we need to activate this?
We had trained for it. This was the advantage of going to a military residency, is I was surrounded by people that had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and sometimes people that had deployed multiple times. And so I really grew up hearing, this is how you do this, because it is different. This is not something people get trained on in a civilian residency program. So I had all those years and all those simulations. And so when it was finally time to happen, I was nervous, and there are risks associated with giving whole blood. I was nervous, but I also felt incredibly prepared to be able to be part of the team to make that happen.
Wow, that's incredible. So you're there, and then is there any other instances or stories, or is that the main one that you'd like to touch about?
Yeah, I think another story is, as an emergency physician, I don't really go to the operating room. That's not something we do. But while I was there, I did go to the operating room many times, because one of the ways to help those patients survive is to get them in and out of the operating room as quickly as possible. Again, the Iraqis that we took care of did not have access to the protective equipment that the U.S. military or NATO forces have. And so when a bomb would go off, their face would be severely injured. They would have ocular injuries and facial injuries. So while the surgeons were working on their chest and abdomen and pelvis, and the ortho surgeon working on their extremities, I worked on their face. I remember the first time I did that, I was talking with the surgeons, and while I've taken care of a lot of facial lacerations in the emergency department, nothing like this. And he was just like, do the best that you can. Try to get everything back into best alignment as you can. This is the best they're going to get. And that was a real, very shocking thing to realize, that most of the world doesn't get to have access to ENT or plastics. And they didn't even have the eye protection that would have prevented these horrific ocular injuries.
How do you think, when you're dealing with that level of trauma on a recurring basis, how do you handle that personally?
Wow, I had to write a whole book about it. I think it's a really challenging thing. And for too long, what we've told residents and doctors is, this is just part of the job. So just get back on the horse. And it was finally after about 10 years of doing this that I said, do I get back on the horse? And what I had began to witness is that there's a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms that people develop. One of them being distancing, compartmentalizing. That's actually what most people are told. Well, you just compartmentalize what's happening to you. And the problem with compartmentalizing is you're shutting yourself down. So you're not experiencing the emotions. And so you have to figure out a way to come back and to attend to what happened. So that's why now I actually advocate for people to do something a little bit different, and that's called safely containing. So when you're in a traumatic experience and you know, I have to keep going, I have to finish taking care of this patient, or I have to go on to the next patient, you mentally flag and say, this is a big deal. This is an issue. I need to flag this, and I'm going to have to come back to it. And how you come back to it might be a debrief with your team. It might be walking outside later and frankly crying. It might be the next day going to a yoga class and in downward dog, you're, again, having some tears come out or just like thinking about, everything that went through. It could be writing, it could be painting. And sometimes it's just a moment of pause and just reflection. But what I would encourage people to think about is develop some type of practice and experiment with having different ways to handle this. Because if you think you can just be a robot and push it down and keep going, it's not going to work out. And I've watched too many physicians get into their 40s, 50s, and their shells of themselves. So safely containing is the key strategy.
It sounds like if you were driven enough to write a book about it, there's probably a personal story of where you reached a low, where you felt that, this is too much for me. Can you share that moment with us?
Yeah. I remember working at a level 1 trauma center, and we had lost a young man. He was probably in his early 20s, gunshot wound Friday, Saturday night. And I was the one that went out to break the bad news to his mom. And I have never heard screams, sounds like what came out of this mother. And she threw herself onto the ground, and she was truly inconsolable. I've broken bad news to many, many people at this point. It's rare that you can't get to a point where usually most people, you can close the encounter with, I'm sorry, I'll still be here, reach out. But we weren't able to do that. She just was completely and understandably just inconsolable. And so thankfully, I've learned over time, you always take a social worker or a nurse or somebody else with you that can stay, because often as the doctor, you can't stay. You have to go do other things. So I left her with the social worker and I walked out of the room, and I had known that this was honestly one of the worst moments of my career, like one of the most tragic, awful things. And I felt nothing. I knew I was supposed to feel something. I knew I was supposed to maybe be tearing up. And I could think back to 5 years previous version of myself that would have been tearing up, that I didn't have anything in me. And so I thought at that moment, wow, like something is not right here. I'm going to have to figure that out.
So then what happened?
Well, I kept working. I would read things from time to time, but really I think I didn't make any huge change. And it was kind of the compounded trauma of the pandemic and nearly wanting to leave emergency medicine that really pushed me to say, no, I have to get help. And so help looked like therapy. It looked like coaching. It looked like writing. And I had to make sense of what was going on and figure out, is there a way in today's healthcare system with the amount of dysfunction that we're all experiencing, patients and clinicians, is there a way to practice medicine wholeheartedly? And so that was an open question that took me about 3 years to answer. And I guess I'm still trying to answer it every day, but I am still practicing medicine. And beyond that, I'm actually recruiting people to go into emergency medicine. So I think I've answered it enough that I do think there's a way with these greater emotional intelligence and these other skills that are not common, they're not commonly taught in healthcare, that we can do this better.
So it sounds like that experience with when you were consoling that mother, that was the catalyst. But it took up to 3 years to actually have the turning point to say, I've got to change something. Do you remember, was there a moment where I was like, you know what, this is just not going to work. I need to change? Or did it just happen slowly over time?
Yeah. In 2021, I left the academic. It was supposed to be my dream job. I left that job and I took some part-time work teaching online for the military with simulation, but I didn't work clinically that summer. I took 3 months off. It was a sabbatical. And that was really the moment where I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I wanted to go to medical school more than anyone. I've wanted this since I was in 6th grade. I was chief resident. I have every predictor of someone that should be succeeding and fulfilled in this career, and I'm not. And so now what am I going to do? Because I've invested a lot of time and money and energy into this endeavor. And so that was really what pushed me to develop a new way of practicing medicine.
And so through that process, what did that look as you figured out, okay, I'm going to develop a new way? What was the first step?
The first step was rest. I had worked a lot of night shifts that year leading up to when I took the break, and my sleep was completely disrupted. And so it looked like going to bed about the same time, waking up about the same time, going to therapy a couple times a month, getting a coach, developing a writing habit, developing some relationships outside of work, strengthening that support. It involved talking to a lot of people, letting them know where I was at, and getting inputs from other people about similar situations that they had been in, so I could start to develop a new approach. Okay, if I'm going to go back, how am I going to do it differently? Because this way I was doing it was not going to work.
So throughout this process, you had this challenge, but then what came of it was a book, you becoming a coach, and now you running a new residency program, I believe. Tell me about the book and your personal coaching business and how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, as I went through this, self-reflection, discovery period, and going to therapy, going to coaching, and I'm talking to a lot of doctors and sharing what I'm learning, I just kept hearing over and over again, I've never heard of that before. Oh, that's really interesting. That would be helpful. And so finally I was like, well, I guess I have to write a book, because I kind of feel like writing a book there's so many books out there. So what are you going to say that's any different than the hundreds and thousands, millions of books out there? And I finally decided, no, being an emergency physician in the United States right now at this moment is different than anything that's happened before. And there is a lot of things from psychotherapy, organizational psychology, mindfulness. There's a lot of different things that we can pull together to be a playbook for people to navigate this moment. I love Brené Brown. I love Adam Grant, all these different thought leaders. But to speak specifically to the contextual issues happening I wanted that book. I wanted it for me. I wanted all the references, and I wanted to be able to give it to people that were in distress and say, I don't have it all figured out, but I have a few things figured out. And here's some crystallized wisdom. Chapter by chapter, you pick up the chapter that you need right now, and then there's coaching questions at the end of each chapter, because again, advice, wisdom is this great thing, but each of us know our own lives, and you have to integrate that. And so I wanted the book to be a place where people could write down their thoughts and really craft the life that they want to lead as a healthcare professional.
That's amazing. So it's not only something you can read, but it's a workbook as well that you can actively apply your own life to throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. And then coaching, I'm a physician fulfillment coach. So I really work with physicians and any healthcare professional. I worked with nurses as well that are interested in having a more fulfilled career, because you worked really, really hard for this. And fulfillment doesn't mean happiness. It doesn't mean that every moment is a Hallmark card or jumping up and down with pure joy. Fulfillment means navigating difficult moments with integrity, and that you feel you can show up and be your best version of yourself, and that you're still you. I think what I was struggling with is I felt like healthcare was changing me, that it was hardening me. And so I really wanted to have a way to meditation, mindfulness people talk about as a strong back, soft heart. I wanted a way to be able to practice that way. So that's who I like to work with.
I love that. So tell me about your role in this new residency program.
Yeah, it was not honestly on my 2025 to-do list. It honestly reached out through the military network, through somebody listening to a podcast that I had done on burnout and asking how I was doing. And I was like, honestly, I'm ready for a new challenge. And so as I began to get to know the company I work for, Vituity, which is a very large physician partnership group, I emphasize partnership because we have transparency, we have profit sharing, which is not what's happening for a lot of emergency doctors. So that was value alignment, that physicians are in the driver's seat and there's transparency in our practices. And then the hospital system is Sacred Heart in Pensacola, Florida. It's a level 1 trauma center, 560-bed hospital. Pediatric hospital is attached to hospital campus. It's all integrated. So it's going to be an amazing place for residents because they're going to be able to take care of patients all on that campus. They're going to see a wide variety of cases, complexity. We really serve the entire panhandle of Florida and parts of Alabama as well. So that's going to be phenomenal. And then our academic affiliate is FSU, Florida State University. So we have a huge academic apparatus behind us that's supporting scholarship. And really, those 3 entities is where I found a lot of value alignment. That Sacred Heart is part of Ascension Healthcare, which is a nonprofit. And at this phase in my career, that was really important to me, that I wanted to be working in a system that the number one thing is to take care of patients. And that's the number one thing everyone said when I showed up there. Why do you work here? Well, we provide a huge amount of free care to Escambia County patients. And I'm proud to be working there and training residents and really putting my secret sauce together. I graduated residency in 2015. I'm starting this residency in 2025. I have 10 years of medical education and nearly burning out and wanting to leave this field to come back and say, no, we're going to do this right. We're going to make sure we build a residency that has physician well-being at the center, and knowing that that's what's necessary to be able to provide great care to patients.
What's one thing that you could implement that would really make sure that it's optimized for physician well-being?
Well, I think one thing that's front of mind for me with residents is right now the ACGME still allows them to work 80 hours a week. For emergency medicine, if you're working emergency shifts, you can work up to 60 hours a week. And I did that. I did those hours during residency. And I can tell you that working that much, it's nearly, I'm just going to say it, it's impossible to be healthy. You know, there's a reason there's a 40-hour work week. So one of the things we're really going to be working on is figuring out how we can schedule people that they get the actual excellent training that they need, but we ensure that they get as much rest as they can, knowing that medical education and residency is challenging. But, you know, I've nearly fallen asleep behind the wheel driving back after a 24-hour shift. So I'm really thinking about that. Like, how do we keep our residents safe and that their working conditions and hours as amenable and appropriate as possible?
You're breaking the cycle because I think after talking with hundreds of doctors, it's this very toxic culture being like, well, I went through this, so you should have to go through this too. But there's got to be some point where you're saying, no, you shouldn't have to go through this because what I went through was not acceptable and not sustainable and got me to a point where it did a lot of harm.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see you now in a position where you can create the curriculum and the change that has the potential to impact residents for who knows how many times to come. How does that feel to be in a position like that?
I mean, it feels amazing. And you're absolutely right. It takes breaking the cycle. I mean, to be honest, a lot of what we dealt with during our healthcare careers was abusive. It was emotionally, and for some people that have experienced sexual abuse, physical abuse. So we have to stop the cycle. And to know that as we do that, we're going to be contributing to those physicians having fulfilled careers. And because of that, they're going to be able to take care of their communities. And what I want the listeners to think about is we are facing a massive physician shortage. Our complexity of patients out there, the number of patients that are going to need healthcare over the next foreseeable future, we can't lose any more doctors. And I'm not worried about AI replacing me in the emergency department. Frankly, I need AI to take some of the work off my plate, given the number of patients that we have. So I'm excited and I'm optimistic that we can attract wonderful people to this field and we can support them to do great work and therefore help our communities and hopefully start to bridge the trust divide that has happened between patients and doctors. And I feel it. And I think as we begin to treat ourselves better, treat each other better, that will be felt by our patients as well.
It's a quiet, maybe not so quiet revolution that's actually happening right now, is that there's more doctors like you that are just saying this is enough. Change is coming and change is going to come now. So even someone who's not a doctor yet, if they're listening to this and saying, I would maybe want to go into the field of medicine and help someone, even though I'm a little scared because I've seen all the negative things that come out there, what do you want to say to them?
Yeah, I would spend some time really reflecting on why do you want to do this? Because the first answer a lot of people say is, I want to help people. Well, there's so many ways to help people. People in city government help people. There's all sorts of ways to help people. So really weighing in on what it is about it that attracts you to it. And then if you finally land on it is that love of science and talking with patients, because that's the thing with healthcare and medicine. It is a humanity forward field. And so if you really land on that, then it's about tenacity. Delayed gratification is the name of the game. And from the time I decided I wanted to be a doctor till I wrote my first prescription, I mean, my goodness, what was that, like 20 years? It was a long time. So being able to know why you're going into it to sustain you on those long nights of studying, when you're in the lab and your friends are off because they're not a science major and they're done for the day, you have to be really clear on that.
It's amazing. It's really good feedback. Well, I can only thank you because it's very clear how committed you are to this vision and to this journey. And the experiences that you had is so incredibly valuable. And the fact that now you're taking them and creating new curriculum, like that is incredible. So all I can say is just thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Spencer, for your platform and for highlighting these stories. And I just hope that the listeners out there take time to really think about how we can each be that change maker and make a positive change that's going to improve their own health and the health of people around them.
That's amazing. And then before we go, tell us if someone does want to follow you, reach out about your coaching, just follow your journey. Yeah. Where should they go?
Yeah. My website is AndreaAustinMD.com. I am most active on Instagram and LinkedIn, and my handle is Andrea Austin MD.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thanks for listening to the MedStory podcast, where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm your host, Spencer Luck, with a special thanks to our executive producer, Shina May. Our music comes from Blue Dot Sessions and the Descript Audio Library. The MedStory podcast is made possible by MedStory Studios and listeners like you. So if you'd like to support us, please leave a review. It means more than. And if you have a story to share or want to produce a podcast of your own, reach out to us at info@medstorymedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode.